Live and direct. We are live all over the web, and I'm very excited to be back with another edition of Monday Night Live every single week right here on the LA Tribune Television Network. Of course, my name is Mo Rock alongside Dr. Natalie Forrest, and I'm excited, Dr. Natalie Forrest, because the show that we have today is about a very important subject matter for every leader, every entrepreneur, and quite frankly, every citizen to be aware of. And we have some real powerful speakers that are going to be delving into the subject matter with us. And of course, Dr. Natalie Force, we're talking about grit. We're talking about grit in the context of leadership. We're talking about grit in the context of our day-to-day life. We're talking about grit in the context of running our businesses. And we have some folks that are uniquely qualified to speak about this subject matter, one of which, of course, is the author of this book right here that I have in my hand. Of course, I'm talking about Rex Steven Sykes, somebody that has been really on the cutting edge of personal transformation for decades and decades. And of course, we also have Scott Harris, who's joining us. Many people in the personal and professional business world know him as Scott the Rhino Harris. He's been, really a dynamic speaker, business owner, entrepreneur for many years, and he really understands the concept of grit better than most. So before we bring them in, Natalie, I want to ask your thoughts on the subject matter and why it's so important for people to be grit-centered and grit-focused with their endeavors.
Well, I don't know if I can answer that because I really want to hear what these two legends have to tell us. And the reason why I'm saying that, because we all understand grit differently. And I think what is remarkable about these two gentlemen is that they are leaders in their own right. And we always talk about leadership in those 5 crucial areas. And they have that leadership, spiritual, mental, in business, financially. And so they're willing to look, because of their experience, at what other people do, accept it, and then work with them. So grit to me is like focus. It's like you have to be focused and stay focused and committed because you have a vision. And I can't wait to hear what these two gentlemen have to add to it because of their experience and how many diverse people they've already worked with.
Well, I appreciate that. And let's go ahead and bring them in. There is Scott the Rhino Harris and, of course, Rex Steven Sykes. I'm so excited to have you two gentlemen here with us on the show this week. And I'm going to start off with Scott Harris. And Scott, first off, just welcome to the show. It's a pleasure and privilege to have you here with us. I know about all the value that you provide and value that you've provided over the course of your life and career. And, this nickname that you have, Scott the Rhino Harris, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. Rhinos are known for being tough, for having grit, for having thick skin. And so I thought that you were uniquely qualified for this week's episode. So I'd love to give you the floor to launch the show this week. Please, Scott Harris, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Mo. And I just got to say it's an honor to be on here with you and Dr. Natalie Forrest. You guys are front runners in the industry. And I just love what the Los Angeles Tribune has done and what they're doing and the fact that they're always out there cutting edge. And when it comes to grit and leadership, I've learned from some really, really great and intense people through the years. And one of the things I had to learn some of it the hard way. When you're an entrepreneur and you start your own business, which I did several times, but the problem was when I first started my own businesses, no one in my family had ever owned a business. So I didn't really have anybody that was showing me how to do it. So, I fell on my face quite a few times. I made enough money to eat most of the time. But then eventually, I got involved in the direct sales and personal development industry. And all you had to do was follow instructions really well, but you had to have the grit to go do what it took. And I did extremely well there. I eventually became one of the top leaders in the company, became a trainer. And, things went wrong with that company. And I said, I'm going to go out and get back into corporate. And I went and got into the oil and gas industry and worked my way from sales to sales manager to vice president of sales to vice president of the company, to executive VP, and eventually CEO. And most of the background I had came from personal development that I listened to through a few personal mentors I had and through books, like the books that Rex Sykes writes, for example, like the leadership short book that Mo wrote recently, like Think and Grow Rich and like a book called Rhinoceros Success. And the one thing they all had in common was it's never going to be easy. Nobody's going to come and save you, and you've got to have grit. So, Mo, I just wanted to start this show off by saying, I don't feel like I'm anybody special. I feel like anybody can go out there and do everything I've done if they're just willing to go through the tough times, and especially if they're willing to take advice from people who have already been there and done that and already have all the medals and the T-shirts.
Right.
That's just my opening right there.
Well, we appreciate you, Scott Harris, for joining us. And of course, grit, whether you want to be a professional baseball player like our mutual friend Jay Noland, whether you want to be a best-selling author like our friend Rex Sykes, or whether you want to run a successful business in the oil and gas industry like Scott Harris has done in his career. Everywhere you look, grit seems to be a prerequisite to success. And with that, we want to give the floor to Rex Sykes. And I know this book covers a lot of subject matters about having grit, about being tough, about accepting the reality that we have to deal with here. And Rex, just your thoughts on the subject matter and to get the ball rolling, the floor is yours.
Well, I'm honored to be here with Dr. Natalie and yourself and with Scott, giants in each of your own fields and the industry of personal development change. So I'm very fortunate. I'm very humbled. When I was a teenager in Los Angeles, there was a guy on TV named Joe Carbo who wrote a book called The Lazy Man's Guide to Riches. And essentially what the book was publish a book that says, do what I do and sell it on television and you get rich. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. I mean, I never bought the book. I mean, years later, I bought the book, found out what it was, but I suspected that that's what it was about. It was do what I do and you'll get rich. And I certainly like the idea of the lazy man's way. So that's how I tried to fashion my life. In other words, I wanted to be able to move forward, but I didn't want to have to struggle. I didn't want to have to bootstrap it. I didn't want to have to do all the kinds of things that a lot of people do in order to succeed, either personally or professionally. And what I discovered was I had to do all of those other things in order to succeed. In my life, I've faced tremendous hardship, as all of us have, and the one thing that I did learn is that hardship is there for us. It is there to shape us, to mold us, to have us pay attention to things that we wouldn't otherwise pay attention to discover those things about ourselves, our own inner strength, our own inner convictions, our own inner passions, and our persistence in order to move through whatever might be challenging or it might be an obstacle, and into the area of success and happiness and wellness, whether that's wealth or health or whatever it might be. So that said, I have fashioned my own life in such a way, and my own mind and my own heart set to say, if I consider everything a blessing, then everything is a blessing. And so I should celebrate everything. If it's good, if it's bad, if it's sad, if it's wrong, whatever it is, it doesn't mean that I encourage wrong. It doesn't mean that I don't grieve if I have, a loved one lost. But what it means is that it's not a problem. It's part of being human. It's part of the experience. It's part of a necessary going through it. In other words, in a 24-hour cycle, there is light and dark. There's hot and cold. And there's all sorts of things that are going on. And it's a gift to have that 24-hour cycle and to have them each 24 cycles for as many as we get while we're on the planet. And so my goal is to celebrate it all. And sometimes it seems a little tougher than others, but you develop the habit. And in developing the habit, you develop a momentum, and it gets easier and easier, in the same way that it seems impossible to juggle or play the piano or ride a bicycle or drive a car. But eventually you make it a habit, you get good at it, and then it becomes really, truly enjoyable. And the better you get, the easier it gets, the better you get. And that momentum takes care of itself. And so with that, I want to pass the, back to whomever. But
who's it going to be? Who's going to be, Rex? You got to pick.
Well, no. I'm the only woman in the room. I'm going to pick. I'm going to have true grit right now, and I'm just going to take the microphone. I had a question for everybody because when we're talking about grit and leadership, we're talking, firmness of mind, and Rex, you were just talking about creating a pattern and really talking about setting yourself up to look at everything in a positive way. So very often when we're thinking about grit, it's that commitment, it's that courage in the face of hardships. It's that commitment and dedication even when there's danger around, right? So getting personal, because we're the Tribune, what in your opinion, in your experience, was the most unyielding, dangerous situation that you were on where you really had to bite your teeth and say, okay, I'm gonna make it through?
There have been a lot. I mean, there's been many of them, but I write about one of them in my book. And I was in my 20s and was an actor in Los Angeles, and I had some success, and then I kind of got to that point where, especially back in those days, if you hit your 20s, your career kind of took a back street, and then when you emerge successful again in your 30s later on, when you looked like a man as opposed to a young man. And I had been misprescribed 2 prescription medicines from a doctor because I had injured myself skydiving. Ooh. And I was in his office, and I was trying to hide it from a girlfriend because she didn't want me going skydiving in the first place. So I didn't want her to know that I had gotten injured. And so I went, but I had been in a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. So I went to this doctor in Beverly Hills who said, "Oh yeah, go ahead and take these." And I said, "Can I take them right now on my way out of the office?" He said, "Sure." He gave me a little paper cup and some water and said, "Go ahead." Last thing I remembered for months. I mean, I should have been dead. I should have died. It was a fatal combination of drugs. The doctors considered me a medical miracle, but suffice to say, I ruined every relationship. I destroyed my career. I thought I was going crazy. I had no idea what was going on. My girlfriend, my fiance, going to hope to marry her, broke up with me and wouldn't have anything to do with me. I didn't know what was going on. And I was nearly comatose when my sister had called my parents who were traveling and said, you need to get here because there's something going on with Rex and we don't know what it is. And what it was not only had I been taking the medication, but then because I was so weird, people were saying, here's the Valium, here's the Quaalude, here's some other stuff, take all these, here's Darvon, so I was a little walking pharmacy essentially at that point. And I couldn't function. So I was nearly comatose. They came, they found me, they threw out all the drugs, locked me in my apartment, took the distributor cap off my car so I couldn't flee and run. And while trying to decide if they were going to put me into a mental institution, and so I went off the drugs. And when I went off the drugs, I felt such shame and such remorse and such guilt. I jumped out of a 2-story window on my head, and I went right through a tree with a cat in the top of the tree, and I hit the grass literally on the top of my head and fell over this way. And there was this metal pipe that had run. I mean, I missed it by a fraction of an inch. It just went right down my back. I fell over and I went, crap, I can't even kill myself. So I ran around the house and up the stairs to do it again. And I was locked out, and I'm trying to break down my door, and the families come running in and they're like, well, how the heck did you get out of here? And so, they were really concerned. And ultimately I said, all right, you know what? I need to do something. I'll go somewhere. I'll do anything. And I didn't. We still didn't do anything about it. So I tried to do things like jog or get my head on straight. And it wasn't working. So I then turned to alcohol. I went to see some therapists who wanted to put me on more medicine. And I was like, wait a second, you don't understand. I'm not taking more pills. I just got off all these pills. Right. But then I started to drink very heavily, and I almost drove my car off a cliff. I would pass out in different places. I pushed around some mafia guy in a club one night who said he was going to kill me. And it was a waiter friend of mine who said, Rex, you're going to die. I mean, you've done this, you're going to die. And it hit me, and I went, but I don't want to die. And it made me realize that through all of this, in every way I tried to shape and destroy myself, there was something that I was still trying to live. Mm-hmm. And so I locked myself in my apartment. I said, you're right. I locked myself in my apartment for a minimum of 6 weeks while I sat in a chair. I got up to go to the bathroom and eat food, but I didn't go out because they said, I am going to have to shape myself. I'm going to have to be confident and capable and calm enough to face the world and try and win my friends back and try and get a career back. But just to go to a grocery store was a major event for me. So I wanted to do it. And so I sat in a chair for 6 weeks. I write a little bit about it in the book and what I discovered in doing that. But it taught me that you can overcome anything. And I didn't think I could. And I did. So.
Wow. I guess that's true grit, especially the missing the metal beam. Well, what about you, Scott?
I'm still in awe of Rex's story. Wow.
Oh, you're still alive.
Well, there's been a few times in my life where I had to have some grit. The first one was when I went into Marine Corps right out of high school. I was barely 18 years old and never been away from home. And the next thing you know, I'm in boot camp for 3 months, right? I've joined the Marine Corps Reserves.
Wow.
But I don't know. I always felt like there was something bigger out there. I'm from a really small town. We had 23 people in my graduating high school class.
Wow.
And I said, I've got to get away from here. I've got to do something different. So as I mentioned to you, I went in the Marine Corps. Afterward, I worked a lot of hard labor jobs. And eventually I said, I need to go to college. I never thought about going to college right out of high school. So I went to college and got a degree in agriculture. My friends always joke and say I got a degree in dirt, right? And when I got out, I had a teaching certificate as well. And for the money that I was offered, I was just like, there's just no way. So I tried starting some businesses, as I mentioned earlier. And when I had fallen on my face enough, my final business was spiraling downward. I spent a whole weekend in a room where I had the lights off and I even had a towel up to the door. And I said, I'm not leaving this room till I figure something out. Now, I got to tell you, I don't believe in taking your own life, right? But if I did, that weekend would probably have been one of those times. But instead, I said, I just got to figure this out. And someone called me, and I was sitting there in the worst of times, and the phone just kept ringing. And back then, when someone left you a message, you could hear it because it was on a message recorder. And I finally just picked up the phone. This guy had tried to call me several times. And he said, I've got these wealthy people that I've met, and I've told them about you, that you're an entrepreneur, and they want to meet you. I don't know why I even believed that because, I hadn't wanted anything yet. So I got in my junky car and drove 2 hours, right? I couldn't even know if the car would make it or if I had enough gas. And when I got there, it was a direct sales company, which I never believed in. Everybody told me they didn't work. I watched the pitch and I said, this makes perfect sense, right? So afterward, as soon as they turned the lights back on, I stood up and said, I'm in. So that night I called my mother and I borrowed a credit card to get started. And I sold every one of those products in less than 2 weeks to everybody I knew. The products were great, right? And people were like, I don't know if those things work. I'm like, are you crazy? So, I went from being at the worst ever in my life to rising up through the ranks of that company, becoming a trainer. Mr. Jay Nolan, who's one of my best friends now for 24 years, he was right ahead of me. He had been involved a little bit longer than me. That's where we met. And when I saw his style, that dude was intense. He had more discipline than anybody I'd ever known. Of course, he played Major League Baseball. He had some incredible coaches in his life, right? Mm-hmm. So I started following him. And he would hit a rank, then I would hit that rank. And he would help me, I would help him. Next thing you know, he's a trainer. He's bringing me up to be a trainer. There you go. That's a picture of Jay Nolan on the bench with Ken Griffey Jr., wow. Right? So, when you got somebody like that you're working with, you have to have grit or you'll quit. Because he said, hey, anybody can be my friend. But if you're going to run with me, you're going to keep up with me. And we do what we call working bell to bell. That meant you got up early and you stayed late every day for the whole month so you could hit the next rank in the company. So we had a blast. We became best friends. But when that company went out of business, here's my grit again. My father was on his deathbed, was what I was told. So I left. I was in Florida working with that company. I left and went back to Kentucky, and I stayed with my dad every day for 6 months. He didn't pass away for 6 months. So we built our whole relationship all over again. My dad was in World War II, by the way. He was on the beach in Normandy. So I got to get to know my dad again. But during that time, that company went out of business. So my paycheck went from up here to nothing. So I stayed with my dad. I stayed with my mom for a little while afterward. And I said, I got an offer to come to Florida and go to work for a company. And it was great. Everything was going good. And then the bottom fell out of everything because of the stock market. And so here I am in Florida, right? I'd already borrowed money from everybody I knew to get back down there because I lost everything when that company went out of business. I lost cars, ran up all my credit cards. And I said, I'm in Florida. This company just laid me off because nobody's hiring. And what am I going to do? So I said, I'm going to start selling merchant services, websites, and long distance. And guess what? I was down to nothing. I had a little dog at the time that I had bought my dad while he was sick. She was with me and she ate premium dog food. And I'm not joking with you. I ate ramen noodles for weeks at a time for all 3 meals. And I had a neighbor that was just nice enough that loaned me $3,000 when I was at the bottom. And then my business started taking off. I started getting some new customers. And then my brother called me and said, you better come back home. Mom's not looking too good. So I had to walk away from all that, get a U-Haul, move back to Kentucky, right? Well, my mom started doing better. And that's when I got into oil business. And listen, with all the training I had from Jay Nolan and from a lot of other mentors that came from books and recordings and things like that, I went in there and blew that wide open, right? But here's the thing. I want to make sure and make one thing clear. When you think you know what winning is, and then you get there, sometimes it's not what you think. Because I went from being the top salesman there, working 4 days a week and taking weekends off to do things with my wife and kids who I met in that same city. Next thing you know, I became a manager, so I was working about 50 hours a week. When I became a VP, I was working about 60 hours a week. By the time I was a CEO, I was working about 80 hours a week. I wasn't working out anymore. I was eating fast food all the time. My health was deteriorating. When I was at home, I was worried about work. At work, I was worried about home, right? And I said, this is not winning. And then that industry started dying and just going downhill, right? And guess what? They came in and the board of directors wanted me to fire a bunch of people and lay a bunch of people off on December the 15th.
Oh, no.
And I'm like, these are people that have been with the company for 10, 12 years or more. And I said, guys, I'm not doing that. And they said, well, it's your job to do it. And I pulled the keys out of my pocket and said, here's the keys. If we're doing what you just said, you go do that crap because I'm not doing it. And so all of a sudden they got all twisted and said, we're the board. I said, well, then I quit. And they decided we could keep those people till at least February ended and let them look for jobs during that time, which was the right thing to do. But I had to put my job on the line. And then I stayed with that company for a year after they couldn't pay me anymore because I had to make sure that things ended the way they should. But that's when I called Jay Nolan and said, hey, I've been watching him build these huge teams, helping people make this ridiculous amounts of money, right? And I got to throw in a disclaimer here. If you don't work, you don't make ridiculous amounts of money, by the way. Right. But he was helping people do things, and he had companies that were breaking records in the industry. I called him and I said, I'm done with oil and gas. I'm done. I'm going to get back in direct sales, and me and you are eventually going to work together. And we've been working together ever since. I get to work from home most of the time. I'm excited. But the hard decisions, sometimes like when you're sitting there in front of that board of directors and they've all got many years of experience and all that, and they want you to go do something that you know is morally wrong. Sometimes you just got to, what I call, rhino up and go, no, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
You should have saw their faces.
Well, Scott, thank you for sharing that. And speaking of Jay Nolan, he actually is in the virtual auditorium. And, we were talking about him here with Ken Griffey Jr. And this gentleman hit a 340. I mean, if you guys know anything about baseball, if you hit a 340 in the pros, you're talking Hall of Fame level talent. And so speaking of Hall of Fame level talent, we want to kick it off now to someone that wrote a Hall of Fame level book. And that's, of course, Rex Stevens Sykes. And, I'm such a fan of this book. I truly think that this is one of the greatest personal development books written of all time. And I'll tell you specifically why I think that, because this book goes straight into meat and potatoes. You don't need to read it from cover to cover. You could do what I do, which is I just open it up randomly and see where it falls. Like right now, it landed on Everyone Faces Challenges. right? Which ironically, Rex, is literally about the subject matter that we have this weekend. This is the second time I've done this, and both times it falls where it's supposed to fall. So I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt, and then I'm going to let you explain the excerpt a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and read a paragraph, and then Rex, take it from there. Everyone faces challenges. Diverting works for this reason. If you have ever tried to resist thinking about something, you know how difficult that is. That's the problem with stuffing. This works because you don't stuff it. You simply acknowledge and thank yourself for wanting to share something. This can work wonders. So obviously some context is missing, Rex, since I just randomly opened it. What are you talking about here? And please, the floor is yours.
Well, first let me say what an awesome tale of courage and persistence from Scott. I mean, just absolutely incredible. And in the book, let me say that there are stories. I have stories of other people who are ordinary people who do extraordinary things in their life, and it's I'm honored to be able to share those stories with readers and people. Just like I'm honored to sit here and to know Scott and to be able to sit here and to listen to you, Scott, talk and share your experience, because it's truly amazing. And I'm humbled and I'm blessed by all of you and by Jay and all the people who are in my life that are so beautiful and wonderful. What that says essentially, Mo, is that when you resist anything, and resistance is normal. I mean, in other words, if I go into a gym and I pick up a dumbbell and I lift it up to do a curl, that resistance is helping build my muscle. So, resistance can be good. Adversity can be good. It shapes us, it molds us. But there's also the notion that what you resist persists. So if I push against one arm and then the other arm, I end up being, just locked, essentially. The energy is frozen. It's not going anywhere. And that's why the notion of mental Aikido is so important. You can direct energy. You can take somebody who's offering you resistance or attacking you, and instead of pushing against them, you can literally lead or direct or move or, out of the way. So what you want to do is you want to learn the mental art of Aikido, whereby you're not resisting your problems, you're not resisting what life offers you, but you're redirecting your own attitude. Tony Robbins is famous for saying, positive thinking is there are no weeds, there are no weeds, there are no weeds, there are no weeds, there are no weeds. And that's delusional thinking. And I'm not saying Tony believes it, but I'm just saying he uses that analogy. And it's not about being Pollyanna. It's not about being deluded. It's not about ignoring what's going on. It's saying positive thinking and being able to direct things is to say, okay, my garden's full of weeds. What am I going to do about it? I can weed the garden. And if I can't weed the garden, I'll pay somebody to weed the garden. And if I can't pay somebody to weed the garden, well, then darn it, I will learn to weed the garden, and I can do it, and I can make my garden look good. So it's always the opportunity to move from being stuck, which implies no movement, to moving. Standing is harder than moving. These people who stand at Buckingham Palace without blinking and the whole thing, that takes a whole lot more energy than it does to walk down the street or to run a marathon.
Yeah.
Believe me, when you stop your body, and I've done this through meditation, when you stop, all that energy wants to go somewhere. And if you're trying to suppress that energy, there's fidgeting, there's blinking, there's all these little micro muscle stuff while you're trying to contain it. And so what I'm suggesting to people is stop fighting yourself, stop fighting circumstances, stop fighting the world, and learn how to direct your attention and direct your energy and direct your mindset and your feelings and your emotions to maximize your efforts, because that way you're not tied up in this battle, but you have all of your energy, all of your concentrated mind power and body power and everything working for you in behalf of where you want to go. So you set the direction. It's kind of like you use the wind, which is resistance against the sail, or the sail is resistance against the wind, in order to get your sailboat where you want it to go. And it's about directing it as opposed to fighting it. So I hope that clarified the quote that you read, and I appreciate you reading it.
I appreciate you, Rex. And I want to talk a little bit about a concept that Buddha spoke about. And of course, the Buddha it's a title of a teacher. Many people have been called Buddha over the years, but I'm specifically talking about the one that is most referred to, yes, in Buddhism, who spoke of this idea of detachment. Okay, Rex. As we go through life, a lot of us have expectations from each other, expectations from other human beings. We expect something from others. We expect other people to behave a certain way. We expect other people to be loyal. We expect other people to be this, to be that. Fill in the blank. What are your thoughts on this idea of having no expectations, and how can we live a life without having expectations from people? And what do we gain by removing these expectations, and what do we lose? Do we lose anything by removing ourselves from these expectations? Rex, please.
Wow, it's a beautiful question. And by the way, who published my book? But Laid Back Buddha Press. I'm known as the Laid Back Buddha, so I had to. But at any rate,
There we go. There's Laid Back Buddha. I don't know if you can see it, but nonetheless, I verify it is in fact Laid Back Buddha Press. Please, Rex.
So it's an amazing thing, because contrast or comparison, the best way to use your mind when you're trying to learn anything is to compare, which means you look for what's similar, and to contrast, which means you look for what's different. So you want to find out what works and what doesn't work, and then you have your path clear in front of you. If you know what doesn't work, you don't have to do it. You don't have to repeat it. And usually we discover what doesn't work by doing it and repeating it. And we keep doing it until we go, oh, crap, I don't have to do this anymore. I better stop. Or I better stop. And, oh, God, now I don't have to do it anymore. And what happens with a lot of people is they compare or they contrast. They see where they are and where they want to go, and they notice the gap between the two. And then instead of focusing on where they want to go, they focus on the gap. And then they feel bad. So they expect to be here, but instead of being there and doing what they have to do, they notice all the time that they're not there. And that creates more suffering. The same is true if you expect other people to respond the way you think they ought to. I do things for my children. I think they should love me. They should be grateful. They should do all these things. And they go, oh, Dad, big deal. Who cares? Whatever. Well, if I'm expecting some kind of return on my investment from them, as opposed to giving unconditionally and giving without expectation, or giving and saying, you know what, if they take my gift and they trash it, they throw it away, so be it. I gave it. I shouldn't have any strings attached to it. I shouldn't have any conditions attached to it. If I'm truly giving, then I'm giving it, and then whatever they do, if they want to regift it, rebox it, redo it, it's not up for me to say. So in that respect, it's expectations can lead you to great things. If you expect the best, you can find the best. If you expect the worst and don't allow yourself to succumb to the worst, but know that there's going to be some adversity, or there's going to be some blowback, or there's going to be some resistance, or that if you go out and knock on 100 doors, 98 of them may say no. And that's all part of the process. The Wright brothers were told by their own father that they were idiots for trying to fly. And, Edison supposedly did 10,000 experiments before he figured out, how to put, a vacuum tube together and have a light bulb work. So resistance is good. But the key is to become aware. The key to answer the question is become aware of what your expectations are and what you're putting onto yourself or onto other people with those expectations, how you're extra pressuring either yourself to conform to a certain way or other people to conform to a certain way, or for that matter, the world to conform to you, because it is going to be whatever it is. So you either learn how to adjust to that and accept it and let go of your expectations or your conditions and your and everything you're trying to. It's basically trying to manipulate the world or manipulate yourself or manipulate other people when you have expectations. So or attachments. And Buddha said, if you can not think for 7 seconds, you would be enlightened. So that ought to tell you something. 7 seconds. I mean, that's popularized now in the law of attraction stuff. But Buddha said 7 seconds without a thought, where you're not attached to a thought, where your brain doesn't go boom, 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 and you'll be enlightened. So consider that for 7 seconds. And, so the point, again, is to release, let go, forgive if you have to, and allow, invite. And what I have a saying, I go, invite, come to me and welcome it when it comes, allow it to be there, receive it graciously, and then accept that you have it. And then just move forward. graciously, and understand that everything is a blessing if you consider it a blessing, and then celebrate everything, and life will be. It's not that life is going to be easier, but your response to life is different. And if your response is different, then life is different.
That's beautiful. And as we slowly wrap up here in the last 5 to 10 minutes of this week's program, I want to give Scott the floor to see what his thoughts are in conclusion.
My thoughts in general, Mo?
Yes.
Well, first of all, I just want to say this. Rex is a legend, and I'm so happy that I got to share tonight with him. It could have been anybody. And in my opinion, he's a living legend. And I can't wait to get to know him better and his work better, because now that I've discovered him and all the things he's been involved in through the years, I'm just blown away. I got to tell you that. Also, Dr. Natalie Forrest, I mean, she's a CEO. She's bilingual, right? She's actually an international best-selling author and an international speaker. So she can speak on grit as good as anybody on the planet. And Mo, I mean, let's face it. Many, many people in this world already know who you are before you even came to the LA Tribune to be the CEO and publisher. You had a singing career where you were known worldwide. You got involved in entertainment, right? You've produced some incredible, I mean, everybody on here, I'm just like, I'm on this with you guys. It just makes me feel awesome. So to finish up and talk a little bit about grit, I got to say, when I was younger, I loved to read. And I read a book by G. Gordon Liddy called Will. W-I-L-L, Will. And in that book, he talked about some fears that he had, and he just forced himself to overcome those fears. I won't go into a lot of great detail tonight. He also talked about one of his sons, it might have been his son-in-law, who was burned practically from head to toe during the military through a big accident and got this like gasoline type stuff all over it. And he went into a burn center. And a lot of the military guys there were rowdy and out of hand, and they asked him if he could help. So every day they would take him into a room and peel the dead skin off of their burn, and people would scream like they were dying. And this man went in, he was a member of the United States Marine Corps. He went in and he didn't scream one time. Now, how do you do that? He had grit. So he became the leader of all those military men. And they did not act rowdy or do anything they shouldn't do anymore. And they started talking and trying to help each other. So when I read this book, it made me feel really small, because I was afraid of the dark, believe it or not. When I was a kid, we went and saw The Exorcist. We went and saw movies like Jaws. And my parents didn't even know what The Exorcist was. We went to the drive-in movies and saw it. And my brother and sister were 5 and 7 years older than me. So my brother loved to scare me all the time, acting like the Exorcist things, or making the noise from Jaws when a light went off, because we had my bed was on one side of the room and his was in the other. It was dark, boom, 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 boom. And I was scared of the dark for years. And I'm like 14 years old reading this book, and I said, no, this will not happen to me ever again in anything. So I was afraid of the dark. What did I do? I read what G. Gordon Liddy did, and I said, all right, I'm going to do the same. I opened my window, walked out, and went out into the woods and stayed there all night long till the sun came up. Now, I practically died about 100 times because you hear things all over the place in the woods. But after that night, I wasn't afraid of the dark ever again. And I've never been afraid of anything ever again. I had open heart surgery, had 6 bypasses, right? When I went down, I told my wife, I said, when I wake up, I promise I won't whine or cry about nothing. You watch and see. I woke up within 5 minutes. I was doing a Facebook video telling all my friends I was doing good, because I decided that. See, some of the things that Rex writes teaches people how to make their mind do things that they wanted to do. I decided to be a better person and not be a big whiny baby. So that's part of what being a rhino is. I've read that book, Rhinoceros Success, probably 10 times. I've read Think and Grow Rich probably 6 or 8 times through the years. I love those 2 books because they will help you, direct you throughout your life. And if you make decisions just not to be that person, not to be that way ever again, you can do it if you really want to bad enough, but it does take some grit.
So Scott, there's some people watching this that are whiners, that are crybabies, that are always complaining about everything in life. And what is your message to the whiners out there?
What did it ever get you? You can whine and cry all you want. I've been there before, right? I used to like to complain. But guess what? There's no statues erected to critics, whiners, or complainers. So the best thing you can do is get some thick skin. First of all, Mo, they should all just make a fist and go like this, and then stick a couple of fingers up in the air. Because they got a rhino up, man, right? That's what it's all about. You can't go through life in fear. You can't go through life like a big baby. Because if you do, nobody's going to look at you and respect you. And you can't respect yourself. And listen, I worked with Jay Nolan on and off now for years. We've been best friends for 24 years. What do you think Jay Nolan would say if I called him and said, "Hey, Jay, I'm having a terrible day, and I'm just mad about something"? He would just laugh and say, "Stop joking around," because we don't do that. We just decided we had 3 rules if we were going to work together, and for anybody to work with us. Rule number 1: you got to do what you say you're going to do, no matter what. Unless a dire emergency comes up, and you let each other know as quickly as possible, right? Rule number 2 is we have to like and trust each other. And rule number 3 is we have to have fun and smile. But if you don't do rule number 1, which is what you say, guess what? Nobody's going to like you or trust you or have fun or smile with you. And I agreed with him that I would be that way with him. I've never met anybody like him. We'd go to bed at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because we stayed up talking about our dreams. And he'd get up at 5:30 or 6 and he'd say, "Hey, Scott, get out of that bed, boy. You can't make no money in that bed." And I'm like, this dude's not human. But I would get up and we would go on over to the office and get things done. And just from working with him back in the 1997 or so until around 2000, completely changed my life. And I knew from that point on, being a whiner gets you nothing in life. Rhino up, everybody.
So Rex, what message do you have to say? First of all, just in conclusion, we're about to wrap up in the next few minutes. Your final thoughts, and before your final thoughts, what message do you have to the whiners, the crybabies, the big babies, the people that complain a lot about life that are watching right now? Please, Rex.
It's funny because I actually have a program called "How to Get People to Do What You Want Without Whining, Begging, Guilt Tripping, or Nagging," and it's about communication and rapport and respecting and going first. But it doesn't get you anywhere, and it doesn't really do anything. Your attitude determines your altitude, and so if your attitude sucks, guess what else sucks? Your altitude. And if you're going through life and you're whining and complaining and looking at all the things that are wrong, you're missing your life. It's too short to be sitting around worried about what isn't working when you could be focused on what is working and appreciating the people in your life who are truly important and the moments in your life. I say make all your moments magical, memorable, and miraculous, because you can. No one's going to do it for you. People who are waiting for the universe or for God or for somebody to come in and save them are missing the point. You need to do your own saving. You need to convert yourself. And Scott just exemplified it great. He said, "I faced my fear. I went out in the woods and I did it, but he did it through the power of a decision." He said, "I'm never going to do that again." And then he took action. He went out and he did that. And in doing so, he goes, I wasn't afraid of anything ever again. And Napoleon Hill talks about R.U. Darby, who stopped digging 3 feet from a really, really, really rich gold mine and gave up an incredible amount of money. And then years later, he made his fortune selling insurance and stuff. But he said, what I learned from that experience, because they were like, "Do you have regrets?" He said, "No, I'm richer than I would have been had I probably been in the gold business. But what happened was I learned never to take no for an answer." And that doesn't mean that you slam people with your product or your service, but he didn't let it stop him. And that's what Scott was saying. I don't let this stuff stop me anymore. So Rhino up is a great attitude. It's a great way to be. It's a great way to live. Stop whining and complaining, because it's not going to get you anything. I can go to Walmart and whine and complain all I want, and nobody's going to give me a thing. I can say, "Hey, I can't afford the bread." What's it going to do for me? So,
well, we appreciate you, Rex.
So let me just say this: live your life as if you were a champion, and your life will have a champion thing. I write about Jamie Nieto in the book. By the way, they can get it at Amazon if people want to get the book. But Jamie,
we're going to select. By the way, I'm going to select one person that has liked this video randomly and give them a copy of this book.
Oh, that's fantastic! That's awesome. But Jamie Nieto is an Olympic champion, 2-time Olympic champion in 12 and or 8 and 16. He missed 12 for a thing. Who was paralyzed. all he could move was his left pectoral muscle, and they didn't expect that he'd ever walk again. And you can find out what happened to him by reading my book. But suffice to say, with his championship, and he's a good friend. He's a beautiful person. If you don't know him, you need to get to know him. Jamie is a mover, a shaker. He's also a screenwriter and an actor and a producer and all sorts of other things. But his goal was to walk his bride, who, by the way, is also an Olympic champion, down the aisle. And so within 2 years of his being paralyzed, which they thought may be permanent, he walked his bride down the aisle. And he did that because he said, my faith, my certainty, and my mindset. I used visualization and I shaped myself. And when I learned that he had been paralyzed, I immediately said, Jamie, if anybody can do this, you can. And he said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm already starting to get
Rex, was he complaining or whining or being a big baby?
No. I mean, that's the most amazing thing about him is that he didn't.
Right.
Jamie is such a beautiful person and has such an optimistic, positive attitude in life. And because think about people who compete in the Olympics. I mean, not all of them are positive. I mean, a lot of them have suffered, done all sorts of things, but they do every 4 years, they have an opportunity to compete for about a minute, and they compete against the world's best, best. They get 3 or 4 shots at it and they either medal or they don't. I mean, and they're put their butts on the line and they know that they need
about a minute. If you really think about it, that's literally all it is. Their whole life comes down to a few seconds.
A few seconds. Did you ever see Jerry Steinfeld's routine about the difference between gold and silver medaling?
Yes. It's like that
gold,
much.
Gold, silver, gold, silver, gold,
right.
Silver.
And life is like that as well, Rex. I mean, if you think about it, life is very much a situation where, you look at who got the bronze, you look at who got the gold, the talent level is not all that different usually. It's just, one was a little bit quicker than the other. And with that, I want to close out this week's episode by giving Dr. Natalie Forrest final words, final thoughts. What are the messages that you would like to end this week's episode with, Natalie? And do you have any special comments for the big babies watching?
Well, I'm going to start with the big babies because to me, everything is a choice. And if you choose to not make a decision, that's still a choice. If you choose to whine, that's your choice. And it doesn't mean that I have to listen. So that is my choice to step out of the room, right? So I don't think whining makes any difference. I do think that every now and then we need to whine for a second to get it out of our system, because we need to get the emotions out, and then we need to take action. Now, having said all that, I think this evening's discussion, we have all this knowledge bottled up in Scott and in you, Rex. And I love reading. I'm a historian. So I always love Aristotle, because to me, everything goes back to Aristotle. And when we talk about grit, when we talk about leadership, what comes to my mind is one of his sayings, which is, I hope I'm saying it right. You will never do anything in this world without courage. It is the greatest quality of the mind next to honor. And so what everybody was saying tonight was courage. It was having standards. It was making ethical choices and sticking with them. And that just really reminded me of those old traditional values. And if we stick with them, and he also talks a lot about habit formation, if we create our habits, then we can move mountains. And of course, then Napoleon Hill comes in and says the same thing. So when it comes to grit and leadership, we have to lead ourselves by being committed to ourselves and our values, and then we bring it to the world.
Amazing. Now, I can't top that, so all I will say is don't be a baby and rhino up. That's all I have to say.
Can I say one thing,
Scott,
Mike?
please.
There's a lot of people out there watching this, and they're going through hard times, right? And they see where we are now. Like, people see the house I live in now. It's a really nice house. And they say, oh, wow, they think you just fell here and landed here. Every one of the 4 of us have been through some very tough and traumatic times in our lives. And I want to encourage anybody out there, if you're going through the hard times right now, it'll be something to look back on and smile and think about when you make it to the top, because you will make it if you want to bad enough and you study the right people. I remember when Jay Nolan and I were sleeping on air mattresses and we were using milk crates for furniture, moving from city to city, doing what it took. And now I live in a nice place. I mean, I can't complain at all. So if anybody does want to whine and complain, just come and do the rhino plunge with me first. We crack the ice on my swimming pool. We dive in under the ice and come out on the other side. I sent you a picture. So anybody wants to whine and complain, come and do that with me first, and then I'll listen to it. But anybody can make it to the top. Well, if I did this with my background, I mean, I'm not saying I'm at the top of the world, but I've got a great life, right? I've had rough times in the last couple of years, right? But I can't complain. Anybody can become anything they want if they study the right people.
Can I add one thing? And I want to have Scott have the last word. I don't want to take the last word, or Natalie or Mo. And that is this. And I've had other things happen to me since that time in my 20s. But I would not have the children or the life I have today had that not happened to me. I would have married somebody else. I would have been doing something else. Who knows what I would have done? I wouldn't have learned any of the things most likely that I've learned that have moved me through the world. So that very tragedy that people will go, oh my, I had a friend of mine, an actor, Nick Mancuso, go, oh my God, Rex, it was like your life was ordained by God. Your children, everything that you went through is because of this. You have to make it a movie, which we haven't done. But the point being is adversity is in Napoleon Hill. Somebody put it up earlier, or Natalie put it up. Inside of every adversity is a seed of equal opportunity. So never let your problems stop you. There's so many people who have had more suffering than I could ever know or ever face, and they can live with a smile. Viktor Frankl and Gandhi and Martin Luther King and people. So anybody else want to close up? Because I don't want to have the last word.
No, I just wanted to thank you, Rex, and we have some royalty in the virtual auditorium. Lene Cook-Braxton, the first African-American NFL cheerleader.
Oh, I love
thank you for quoting me, Lene. Quote unquote, don't be a baby. That's it. That's my contribution for this week. Rex is citing Viktor Frankl and Gandhi, and Scott is talking about these in-depth stories. All I have to say is don't be a baby. I have nothing more to contribute this week. I keep things simple. Just don't be a baby. And with that, we will see you next week, same time, same place. I want to thank everyone. This has been a presentation of the Los Angeles Tribune Television Network. And don't be a baby, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Rhino